Welcome back to Restless. I'm Father Joseph Gill, along with Paul, Joe, and Lauren. As together we restlessly seek the face of Christ in today's crazy and mixed up world. And last month we had kind of a pretty exciting thing happen in the world, especially in our country, and that is the overturning of Roe versus Wade in the Dobbs versus Hodgsons, or whatever it is, the court case. And that came out on the Feast of the Sacred Heart, which was very exciting, great timing, along with in normal years, it's also going to be the Feast of the Birth of St. John the Baptist, kind of very fitting days. And we want to kind of talk about that and how that's going to impact the pro-life movement, how that impacts us personally, because all of us are very deeply invested in the pro-life cause, and kind of just what's the forward. And thankfully, Joe's a paralegal, so he's going to speak a little bit about the legal elements of that case. And so what was your reaction when you did hear the news that Roe versus Wade had been overturned?
Well, I think it was kind of a weird reaction, because just the facts and circumstances that led up to the release is that, we had the leaked opinion about a month or so prior, which doesn't happen. I don't know if that's ever happened, but
I think that was the first time.
It was the first time, yeah. And so, that created all types of craziness politically and in social circles and with the justices, especially the conservative justices. And so so when it actually came out, I wasn't particularly surprised. It was more of I was relieved, because it did come out. It came out as we had expected it. The actual, it was a little weird the way it was written with the two different rulings, but in case. But I was relieved, I would say, because it was finally here. We thought it would be coming, and now it was here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't decide in the run up to the release of the actual opinion if I thought that the opinion as we saw it leaked would be the opinion, because it was draft and we don't know. All we knew is that at that moment there were 5 votes for it. And I saw that it was overturned and immediately had to go into a closing. And so I couldn't look at my phone for like half an hour, but I felt my whole leg vibrating the entire time, all the people texting me and so obviously, praise God, right? I think I actually emailed you all praise God within 10 minutes of the opinion being released.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, it's an amazing day for this country. And it's the writing of an incredibly, of a true calamity, right? Of a legal and moral calamity, which was visited on us 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Or however long ago it was. So
Yeah, 49 years.
I would say I was delighted. I found out through one group chat of local women in Stanford, one of whom is really active in the pro-life movement. And then there was a family group chat that came right after that. And kind of like Paul said, it wasn't a surprise. We've been clued into this being the likely result, I think, for 6 months now. For the first time ever in my life, I paid attention to the March for Life, the day it actually happened. And all the reporting, on that day was everyone that was being interviewed was saying it's going to be overturned this year. So it's been expected all year. And then obviously there was the draft leaked opinion. So we knew it was coming. It was just a matter of when. So it was, really exciting.
I can honestly say I didn't ever see it coming in my lifetime.
No, me neither.
I really thought that we would have this till the end of time.
Well, going back a few years, I could say the same thing. And I remember, past presidential debates where the abortion topic always comes up and it's always so heated, and thinking, why is this even being debated again? Abortion is never going to become illegal. Just feeling like it could never change. And then finding out that there were issues, right, with Roe versus Wade, and that there was no constitutional right to an abortion.
Roe versus Wade was entirely made up law, and it was founded on other.
Well,
laws.
It wasn't a law. That's
well,
the
but it
problem.
was no. As a matter of case law, it was not only completely fabricated, but based on other cases which were completely fabricated. So just to the extent that the late Justice Ginsburg said, it was effectively said the same thing, that it kind of lacked a solid basis. Yeah, it was legally weak as very weak, but sorry about that. It was legally
weak as a donkey that just gave birth.
Weak as something. Weak as something.
I don't know.
But yeah, I didn't think that there was a 5th vote to overturn it. I thought that there were a lot of 7th votes to overturn it. Right, a lot of people would be happy to join an opinion that overturned it if they weren't the deciding vote. So, praise God that there were 5 people who had the courage to do so.
Yeah. But what was that deal with the 6th vote, right?
So, okay, really quick background. It takes 5 votes to cast an opinion in the Supreme Court. You can decide a case on just the question presented. So the question in this case was, can the Mississippi law be allowed to stand, which banned abortions after 15 weeks? Yes to that proposition, that law can be allowed to stand. There were 5 votes to say, yes, it can be allowed to stand because Roe versus Wade was wrongly decided in its entirety, needs to be overruled. That was the majority opinion. Chief Justice John Roberts, the sixth opinion, said actually there was two holdings to Roe. There was the right to privacy / right to abortion, and then there was a question of like the what tests you apply and how much like kind of wiggle room do we have. He focused on the second one and said, well, the undue burden by Planned Parenthood versus Casey actually doesn't make a lot of sense, and so this law can be allowed to stand not because Roe is wrong, but because this one holding from Roe and Casey are wrong.
Yeah,
which is
so it was a lot more narrow.
Very narrow. So the Roe was overturned not because of his efforts, but because of the efforts of the other five. Part because of his efforts.
So, but one thing we have to be very clear, because a lot of people were super rejoicing, is that the overturning Roe versus Wade does not make abortion illegal.
Yeah.
It just sends it back to the states.
Right.
Which,
Correct.
Living in the Northeast, in Connecticut,
It changes nothing.
It changes absolutely nothing.
In fact, they might get more extreme.
Well,
in
our tax dollars will be used to pay for abortions for women in Alabama within the next few years. Guaranteed Connecticut will be funding travel for people to come have abortions here. So they will get worse, actually, in some parts of the country, I would say.
Well, I'm starting to see businesses doing that.
Yeah.
Which I can understand, honestly, from a financial standpoint, because it's easier to have an abortion than to have to pay health insurance for a child for 18 years.
Maternity leave, health
Maternity
insurance,
leave,
all that.
all
Yeah,
that. But I mean, that to me is really atrocious that businesses will bend over backwards for that.
Yeah, and a lot of these companies, I mean, there are large tech companies and banks and things, and it's like it's hard to live without these particular companies. That's a separate issue, but it's just like, oh, it's just terrible.
Yeah. So what was the reaction of your family and friends? Do you have pro-choice friends who had a very different reaction?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Direct quote from one of my college friends, are they going to go after contraceptive next? Meant ironically. Although
Justice
Yeah,
Thomas said maybe.
Well, that's a little more complicated than that. But yeah, the Justice Thomas opened some doors for sure. But yeah, no, I mean, a lot of ridiculous Facebook posts, right?
I don't have Facebook.
I have a lot. I've seen a lot of ridiculous Facebook posts.
Yeah.
I
I was
lost-
actually, so my company has been generally, they're okay. They're like more balanced than most companies, but generally like lean liberal. They actually sent out a fairly balanced, I think because I'm not quiet at my company, I think that they sent out a fairly balanced note being like, there's a lot of opinions about this. Some people will be happy, some people will be sad, but it's, but please respect each other's opinions, and it's a workplace, and move on.
that is
Because it was actually
pretty balanced,
very
to be
balanced.
honest.
I was shocked.
Yeah.
And so one of my like coworkers who we're both Catholic, and like I'm not closeted Catholic, she is. We were like texting back and forth, being like, "Wow, that was actually a pretty good note, like for my company." So
That's funny. I agreed with a Facebook post from a pro-choice friend of mine, and in agreeing with it, she unfriended me.
Nice.
Because the Facebook post was a quote from a very liberal source. It said, all these people are just pro. If you only want the birth of the child but not the upraising and everything, you're pro-birth. You're not pro-life. And I said, I absolutely agree. And thank goodness we have all these crisis pregnancy centers that are willing to give you formula and diapers and financial aid and all this stuff and job training. And she unfriended me.
Behold progressive tolerance.
But I was thinking what a straw man argument to say, oh, all you pro-lifers are just really pro-birth.
yeah, I mean back in the 70s, this probably, I mean there wasn't that network of like pro-life support centers out there, but it's like, okay, well, we fixed that.
I think that's one of many lies that is being spread by the pro-choice folks to really, it's just spread fear and control people, right? Because we know it is movement is only about protecting that life of that child until it's born, and there's pregnancy centers all over the place, as we're talking about, but what is the other side doing? They're burning them down.
I know.
Yep.
Why destroy pregnancy centers that are helping women? Are you for women if that's your reaction? It makes no sense.
Right.
Well, they're not for women or against women. They're for narrative and political expediency.
But looking at it from a spiritual perspective, I'm going to say something that could potentially be controversial, but abortion is Satan's sacrament.
Mm-hmm.
Satan loves abortion. He loves the destruction of human life because this is the greatest gift that God gave us, this innocent child in the womb. So there's a spiritual component that a lot of people are being motivated by, wittingly or unwittingly, to really kind of froth at the mouth about this so-called right to abortion.
Absolutely. And I think we're seeing that more and more because I think the general used to generally not know what was the developmental stage of the unborn child as the pregnancy progressed. And people could say it's a clump of cells or it's not a. Now we know, like day by day, in the beginning, week by week.
Yeah.
We know what is done in an abortion procedure. You can Google it and find a YouTube cartoon video. People are very well aware that this is a human life that is being ended, and they're still fighting for that right.
That was an argument back in the 90s. I mean, and that argument, like from a scientific perspective, it's almost not brought up anymore. Like now it's completely focused away from the baby, which is where the focus should be, to women's rights issue, which is a different. It's just ignoring the actual substance and focusing on something that's an effect.
See, the smart pro-choicer says this is a difficult question because you're talking about the competition between two people's rights, and the question is how do you resolve that in favor of the mother or the child? But the average pro-choicer says there is no right to the child of the child. There's only the question of what the mother is allowed to do.
Correct.
Yeah. And part of that challenge is that to know somebody's versus like the biology. Okay, when does a person receive rights? Well, that's a philosophical and theological question. It's not something you can scientifically test. You don't know. Okay, at this moment, this zygote, this fetus has received rights. You don't know that. I mean, our faith tells us that at conception is the new human soul, but you can't test that scientifically. So a lot of people will say, well, we don't know when the fetus receives rights or whatever. But if that's the case, if we really don't know, then we have to err on the side of caution.
Right? I would say, too, we know it is of the human species.
And distinct from the mother.
And we know that,
father.
It is going to grow. We know the course of what has begun since conception. And the other thing that, you'll find all the time is, well, your faith tells you that life begins at conception, but science doesn't prove that. And it's like, no, actually, science that life begins at conception. And in any other area where we want to create life, whether it's like for animals, for breeding, right? We know what needs to be done to create that new life.
Right.
Okay. It's always the same process. So we know through science, this is when life begins, but people love to have that debate. I guess it's a way out for them. Because there's like the discussion of, well, it's really the implantation and what about miscarriages and such. But it's a new life, as we all know, and completely new genetic code right from that moment of fertilization.
Yeah. I mean, it's if you look at a lot of pagan religions over time, child sacrifice, human sacrifice generally, and then particularly child sacrifice was just kind of a common feature of these paganisms. And so we have our modern material secular paganism that's taken over the world, and or at least in Western civilization, and this is our version of child sacrifice.
Is that the case in the Old Testament with the people who worshipped Baal? They were sacrificing their unborn or their babies. Is that correct?
Not to Baal so much as Molech.
Okay.
And Molech was one, yeah.
There've been a lot of memes about Molech since
there have been a lot of memes
of Roe and Casey.
And I mean, right outside of Jerusalem was a valley called the Valley of Ben Hinnom, and the Valley of Ben Hinnom was basically a constantly burning fire because back in those days they didn't have trash removal, right? So they would just throw their garbage in this trash removal. But also in that area of this constantly burning fire is they would sacrifice humans, sacrifice children. And so when Jesus talks about Gehenna in the Gospels, he's actually using this word, the Valley of Ben Hinnom, which is a place where the fire never dies and where children are sacrificed.
And I think that just speaks to like what Paul is saying, and the spiritual side of this is an evil, demonic spirit that has been corrupting and leading people astray since humans have existed. It's the same practice of sacrificing your own child, just done in a different form. And people are still being deceived or thinking it's not a human life, or not caring that it's a human life and their own child.
Well, Paul, as you were talking, I was thinking of the example of Stevie Nicks from Fleetwood Mac, who you may remember a couple of years ago in 2020. She came out and said that without her abortion, Fleetwood Mac would not be a thing. So she was willing to sacrifice her child on the altar of her dreams and her fame and her career.
Yeah, I'm not a big Fleetwood Mac fan, so I guess
I'm not
maybe,
either, but
maybe
my sister-in-law's named Stevie after the singer.
But that's what
really?
people don't realize.
I know, right?
That's what people don't realize about it. I think that a lot of people on both sides, frankly, don't really understand who we're talking about when we're talking about people who have abortions. Because the people who are pro-choice would have you believe that it's always a child who was raped and therefore she has to have an abortion. That's obviously, statistically speaking, almost no people.
It's like less than 1%.
Yeah. But the people on the right would have you believe that it's only like super reckless teenagers and like people in their 20s who just want to be able to have sex with abandon and then have abortions as a form of birth control. That's not really true either. In a lot of cases, it's like, middle-aged people who have kids and don't think they can afford another one, don't want to have to make life changes.
Sometimes it's married couples.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And they say, well, I can't afford a fourth kid. And so I can't work more, whatever it is. So this is an option available to me, right? Like that's actually who we're talking about.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases. And it's the sacrificing your child on the altar of your life, of your current family, of your career, of your social status in some cases, right?
Yeah. And without a doubt, I mean, it would take sacrifice to raise a child
Right.
in a difficult circumstance. But I think it's always better to exist than not exist, even if your life is rough and not filled with glitter and vacations. And
I guess from the women's rights, maybe Lauren, I have a question for you, is that when I hear things like, well, women are, they won't be able to, attain their dreams or like the Stevie Nicks thing or have a career in that because, they won't be equal then. I think about like, man, if I was like a woman, which I'm not, like I would be.
I was doubting that the whole time, but
I would be
glad you
thanks,
clarified.
Father. I'd be so like deeply insulted because it's like, wait a second, why are you telling me what I can and cannot do? What do you tell? Like why can't I do both? I don't know from like a women's liberal perspective, like why is that the case? Why are you demeaning women in that way?
Well, that's why I think Amy Coney Barrett is such a great example because she has seven kids.
Seven, two are adopted.
And she's on the Supreme Court. I mean, here's somebody who's obviously living her dreams and being a great mother.
Yeah.
I think that's a lie that the pro-choice side spreads, actually. They are put out in society as this is the side that supports women, but they are actively telling women who go into the abortion clinic, you can't be a full-time college student and a young mother, or you can't raise this child on your own because the father is absent. So they're suppressing women by offering this alternative, right, which is not supportive. It's really destructive, right? It's harmful. I mean, beyond the physical harmful effects of an abortion, which if you could just imagine, it seems like an awful thing to do to your body. It's also like mentally very taxing, and women go through depression and suicidal, attempts and thoughts and depression, and it causes cancer. There's so many things that could happen from having an abortion that are terrible to women beyond just the immediate, you cannot do this, you cannot do both, whatever. The pro-life movement is the exact opposite, right? Saying you can, and here are organizations that Father Joseph mentioned that can help you, right? They exist in every city, and the other side is constantly trying to defund them, make them illegal, get rid of them, and now actively destroy them, right, by firebombing them. But I think it's a huge lie, and we all know that there's a huge women's liberation movement, and it's been going on for years, right? Women can do it all. You can have this job. You can. So it's just a total farce that you can't be a mother and accomplish your career goals. And let's just say there was a company or some kind of acting gig or a band or something that said, oh, actually, we're not going to accept you because you're expecting. Well, that's discrimination, and it's illegal, and you can take that organization to court, and you would win. You know what I mean? Or you'd find an alternative.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if you could take Fleetwood Mac to court if you have a baby, but
to live is to choose. And any choice you make, you have to die to the other options that you didn't choose. And the reality is that most people who get pregnant choose to have sex. We allowed to say that on the radio?
Sex?
Yeah. I don't know what the rules are. I have to twice, so I guess it's two looking glass now, aren't we?
All right. If anybody has 8-year-olds, please cover their ears.
Yeah. For
they know the topic because we said it from the beginning.
Yeah.
That's right.
But no, I mean, the reality is that you made a choice, and this is we've spoken before about the radical obsession with autonomy Americans have, and this is the worst example of it, right? It's I can do whatever I want with my body, and you have no right to impose any responsibility on me or any of the effects of my actions. I can't be forced to feel any of them. So I wanted to have a relationship with somebody, and I got pregnant, and you can't force me to live with the consequences of that. It's grotesque.
Well, you hit on the point that abortion is one of the many offshoots of a deeper root, and that deeper root is the sexual revolution, which detaches sex from marriage, sex from commitment, sex from reproduction. And the core then, the key to get back to holiness is not to pass laws, but ultimately to live chastity. Yeah. Because I was having this conversation with my brother who doesn't believe in God, at least publicly, he says he's an atheist. And we were talking about the Me Too movement. And the Me Too movement, which has been, so bad for women, or, for really the culture, just to recognizing that there is really a culture of rape sometimes. And he said, we got to do this law and that law. And I said, well, why not just practice chastity? And he said, chastity? Who believes in that anymore? Right. And yeah, that's the reality, is that if people practice chastity, there would be less need for abortion. I know it's a radical solution.
Yeah, there was articles that came out and other news stories and things about how women are going to have to rethink their lives, and they're going to be more choosy when considering to have relations with men. It's like,
yeah.
Good.
Oh, it's like, why you're, and that's and then but the bias of the news story is it's a terrible thing.
Right.
Like, that shouldn't be the case. That shouldn't be the burden of the woman. It's like, what do you mean it's burden?
Right. Burdened with the consequences of your actions.
Yeah, and it's true that men have less consequences when they have sex with whomever they want.
But can I say, I love I have an idea. How about now, if a man fathers a child, he has to pay for it, and it's like you just invented child support. Congratulations! What are you talking about? Have you ever seen You Are the Father or You Are Not the Father? Like, what do you not live in the world? What are you talking about?
Have you seen that show?
Yeah,
I've seen clips of it.
Jerry Springer.
I know it exists.
Jerry Springer, by the way, is recorded right here in Stamford, Connecticut. For all of you listeners,
when it was on the air.
Oh, is it no longer in the air?
No,
that's good. Anyway, so as we're talking about, the nation really is still divided. So what do you think is the future of this fight? I mean, are we still going to remain a divided nation? Is it ever going to go back to the Supreme Court, or is the Congress going to pass a law that makes it legal in all 50 states? I mean,
no.
What do you foresee the future of the fight being?
The pro-life movement is about to find out that the Republican Party doesn't actually care about it very much, and that they were a means to an end of mobilizing voters. And they're going to regret the extent to which they have associated themselves with the Republican Party and not the Democratic Party. Because what's going to happen is a lot of Republicans who are going to start saying, well, I'm 100% pro-life. That means a 15-week abortion ban. Does it? Is that what we fought for? Did anybody think that's what we were talking about? This is going to be a much slower, more incremental process than people are ready for. It's not going to change the majority of the country. And the places where it is going to change already had almost no abortions. The reality, and sorry, I am the pessimist in the room, but the reality is that the abortion rate in this country is not going to be changed very much because of this opinion. That's a much longer fight.
Well, you look at New York and California.
Right. Yep. Much longer fight.
I look at it as this is actually the beginning.
Yeah, of a long fight.
Right. This is the beginning of this, because before we had this impediment, and a lot of, like you were saying, a lot of politicians could hide behind.
Yeah, I'm 100% pro-life. What does that even mean?
Yeah.
What does it even mean?
I mean, I would hope that I hope that people mean what they say and say what they mean, at least on the Republican side. That's probably not always the case, or frequently the case, but I think it starts now. And so the state-by-state pro-life movement, like, it'd always be like the first March for Life ever in Connecticut we had in 2022. It's like, well, that is actually now more
mind-boggling, because why did we not do that earlier?
I don't know. But now it actually becomes more important.
And I'm grateful it's not in January, the coldest month of the year.
That's true. Yeah. And what's the March for Life in Washington look like? Because I always...
Well, why bother at this point? That's not what the fight is anymore.
Yeah, the fight's not there anymore. Yeah. I mean, it's a show of support. And obviously, if the Congress starts moving toward laws and things, I think that they would have to be challenged constitutionally. I'm not sure. But I don't think the current state of politics is the case where where House or the Senate would even have the will to take that up.
Well,
it's so dividing.
Well, I guess the question is, we got midterm elections coming up very shortly. And the question is this going to galvanize pro-choice people to say, let's put this now through the legislative branch instead of the judicial?
It might. And that's, the reality is that the overturning of Roe versus Wade is not, it is a victory for the pro-life movement, but it is not the victory for the pro-life movement, because what it does is say we can have politics on this question again. And we have been prevented from having real politics on abortion for 50 years because it was taken out of the hands of legislatures.
Yes.
That's not going to be the case anymore. Pro-lifers are going to lose a lot of fights. They're going to win a lot of fights too, but we're going to lose a lot of fights.
Especially
they're going to be a lot of very stupid legislators are going to say, even if it's stillborn, is if a woman has a stillborn child who's going to kill them, they still can't remove the, like there are going to be all kinds of crazy, radical, not even in keeping with Catholic teaching rules. They're going to pass legislatures in places because, and then they're going to be pointed to in places like New York and California, and they're going to radicalize the pro-choice side. Like, it's going to be it's going to be very messy is my point. It's going to be very messy. And I think the pro-lifers need to steel themselves for that fight.
So in a sense, you're saying it might be even more divided in the fact that pro-choice states will get more pro-choice. Pro-life states will get so absurdly pro-life that...
Yeah, well, there's nothing worse for movement than success. Because you end up with all kinds of grifters who want to keep the movement going afterwards, and then you have to actually legislate and govern and make decisions that are unpopular. It's one thing to say, I'm 100% pro-life, and then you have to actually say, okay, legislature that has Democrats in it who are pro-choice, this is what we're going to do, and you're going to start losing people. It's just going to get complicated. Politics are messy. So this is not. I'm just saying it's not going to be a clean thing. It's not a 5-year plan. It's like another 500 years of this fight, right? Like,
oh my gosh! I hope Christ comes again before then.
Well, he very well might.
So I think you asked a question about, is this going to cause more division in the country? We've already seen a sorting of people in the country. You see red states getting red, which is like shocking, but like red states are getting redder and blue states are getting bluer as red people move from blue states to red states. Not communists.
Great sort.
Just to but it's
what
happening.
About the purple people?
Yeah, there are purple states still, although the number of purple states has been dwindling. Like Ohio was always a swing state, and now it's like looking like it's probably going to be pretty red for.
Yeah, but
Florida used to be the big swing state.
Now it's pretty galvanized toward red, and like Texas was going blue, but then the Hispanic population has been starting to vote Republican more and more, and so we're seeing this sorting in the country, and it's like, well, that's kind of how it's supposed to be, but I think the sorting is okay when it's like individual political issues, but I think the sorting now is happening based on like really fundamental like moral beliefs and social beliefs that really weren't a problem in the country before that now are.
Yeah.
As opposed to we want more government or less government. Now we're disagreeing on fundamental issues of life and things like that, which is going to be very difficult to solve.
Yeah.
And so we're going to see a continued sorting.
Which is why I've always hated when people just kind of lump this in with culture war issues. Okay, this is bigger than like, are we...
This is in pronouns.
Yeah, this isn't pronouns. This is not censoring a movie. This is like a matter literally of life and death for 60 million babies. I mean, for me, it's more than a cultural issue. So...
Yeah, and so we know that the battle is now within the states, right? Within each state. And we have a Planned Parenthood in Stamford, Connecticut that should really be shut down. And that will take pro-lifers, right, and Catholics actually coming out to make that happen. There's a nonprofit called 40 Days for Life where you have 40 straight days of public presence in front of a Planned Parenthood 24 hours a day. We have how many thousands of Catholics in Fairfield County?
I don't know the statistics, but it's a lot.
We've covered it before. We have a lot of Catholics here.
Or something. Yeah.
Can we get 10 to 20 people to show up every day, all day, to shut down our Planned Parenthood where we know that lives are being ended and that they have been ended? I mean, that would be a great step right here in Stamford. And it just boggles my mind that we have the Sisters of Life Retreat Center here. We have all these Catholic churches. We have all these Catholics, and we're all just okay. Well, I mean, maybe we're not okay, but we're not bold enough and we're not courageous enough to go stand in front of it and pray the rosary once a week, which I know because I've done it, and it's a small group of people that are actually willing to do it.
Yeah.
And now the other side is more activated, and they have more chaperones on Wednesday and Friday mornings. So our local center could use your support to show up on a Wednesday or a Friday before you go into the office between 7 and 10 a.m. and just pray a rosary or just be supportive, just get there. And I think the other thing we can do is know what are the other resources. So in Stamford, we have Hope Line, Pregnancy Resource Center, located on Summer Street in Stamford. Maybe go to their website, look at what they do, be able to offer that as an alternative to somebody if you happen to be in a conversation with somebody, or figure out what they may need. We have Malta House in Norwalk, right? I mean, these nonprofits need funding, support, diapers, right? All these kinds of things that we can do to support the pro-life movement.
Yeah. And finally, I just want to conclude by mentioning that if any woman listening to this has had an abortion, the Catholic Church has a lot of outreaches to people with who are suffering from the depression, from the guilt of the post-abortive situation. For example, the Sisters of Life here in Stamford do offer retreats that are healing. Mm-hmm. And there's a wonderful ministry called Rachel's Vineyard, which is run by the diocese, which offers retreats. I've helped on one of the retreats. It was extremely powerful and a very healing presence. So remember that God's mercy is stronger than whatever sin we've ever committed. And even this sin can be forgiven by the love of God, and we can find that peace again. So do not despair. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Restless. Let's go out and do our part to bring the good message of life, that life is such a great gift given to us by God. Bring it to the ends of the earth. Pray for an end to abortion throughout our land. You can find us on Veritas Catholic Network, 1350 AM, and wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in next time.